when interest rates come down, not if, but when, you're going to see a lot more buyers coming into the market. There's going to be even greater competition, more offers being made on homes, pushing housing prices even higher than they are now.
Real estate agents, do you want to move your business forward? Well, I'm here to help. Hey guys, Brittany with Brittany Hannon Real Estate. I'm a real estate agent, coach, and investor. And every Monday at 11:30 Pacific Standard Time, I'm here to bring you information that's going to help move your business forward. Whether you're a brand new beginner or an advanced top producer, I'm going to bring you key tips and tricks and strategies to move your business forward. This is your official invitation to join us live every Monday at 11:30 a.m. They're totally free. And if you want more information about coaching, check the link in my bio and I would love to help. Now let's jump into this week's workshop. All right, guys, it's 11:30, so let's jump in and get started. So I'm here today with Martin Rosenblum. He's one of our favorite lenders from Motif Mortgage.
Hi there.
And we are going to do this kind of Q&A interview style. So I'm going to ask him some questions. If you guys have questions, put them in the chat. We want you to come off Zoom or come off mute and ask some questions. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask. But as we go, he might be sharing the answer to some of those questions that you might have. So keep that in mind. But we want to hear your questions. We want to hear from you. So don't hesitate to jump in there and ask your questions. So Martin, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, about myself. Okay, interestingly enough, last week on Wednesday, May 15th, that was my 39th year in mortgage lending. I started back on May 15th, 1985. So I've been doing this now for 39 years. I can't believe that. So hopefully, I'd like to think I'm good at what I do. That's why I've been doing this for so long. And one of the interesting things that did pop up when I announced that last week, one of the agents asked, so what were interest rates back in 1985 when you first started? So they were coming down off of the highs from the early 80s, because if you guys remember, 82, 83, interest rates were hovering in the 16 to 18% range. So when I started back in 1985, interest rates had come down to the awe-inspiring 11%.
Wow.
And then it took a couple of years later for them to hit single digits. So these are interest rates that are not new to me. I've seen things like this before in the market that we're in, even though rates are a little bit on the high side as compared to where we're at. We're not that far off from what normal interest rates or normal market rates are. So please keep that in mind. So yeah, they were higher a long time ago. They've been a little bit higher recently as compared to where they were, but interest rates right now are not that far-fetched out of the norm. So please keep that in mind. And hopefully maybe coming down here in sometime in the next year or so.
Okay, good. So speaking of that, what are interest rates today?
Another great question. I love this one as well. So because of how interest rates work, and they're all structured based on what's called loan level pricing adjustments, or LLPAs, if you've heard that term. Because of all of the different scenarios that buyers bring to the table that can create their interest rates going up or down, and a new factor that's come into play, which is the community lending program. And the community lending program is based for certain properties in certain locations. There's a lot of them here in Oxnard, some in the Ventura, other Ventura County areas, possibly some up in the Central Coast areas as well. So when you look at properties that are in the community lending area, those interest rate loan level pricing adjustments virtually get waived. So anytime somebody asks me what interest rates are, I always tell them they're between 6.5% and 8%. And people look at me kind of funny. And it's interesting because you have to understand that anytime somebody brings something to the table, whether it be their down payment, their credit score, the property type, or various other factors that create these pricing adjustments, interest rates can be skewed all over the place. So I've had clients, same price range, same down payment, same credit scores, but they could be looking in Oxnard, or they could be looking at some areas of Ventura. And the interest rate on the home in Oxnard could be 6.5%. And then that offer doesn't get accepted. They go looking at other properties, and now they're looking at another home, same property type, same sales price range, same down payment, same credit score, but now their interest rate 7.5% to 8%. And they look at me like, well, wait a minute, you quoted me 6.5. Well, that was because they were looking in an area that fell into the community lending area. So when it comes to interest rates, they can be all over the place, but please understand that it all varies depending on what's being brought to the table and where that property may be located as well, and that does come into play. So interest rates right now, realistically, I kind of quote to everybody the good guy rate of around 6.75% as a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. But please keep in mind that interest rates could be higher for certain buyers depending on what they bring to the table and where that property may be located. First-time home buyer programs come into play as well. If your income is under a certain amount and you are a true first-time home buyer, does not have to be first generational buyer like it was for the Dream for All program, but those loan level pricing adjustments get waived for first-time home buyers as well. And a lot of people can qualify for those. So that's why it's always recommended, get your clients in through the door. Let's get them talking to your motif mortgage loan officer. Let's find out where they're buying, what they bring to the table, what can create those interest rates, and what the interest rates for specific buyers might be.
So I hear you saying specifically here in Ventura County, some in the Central Coast, we actually have agents in lots of different market centers all across Southern California. So down to Lake Forest, some in Carlsbad, some in Chino Hills.
Okay.
So for those people, are there community lending types of things like that?
That's a great question. I apologize. I didn't know who was on the.
Yeah, we have lots of agents.
Okay, so I didn't know that.
Agents from all over.
Okay, I primarily handle the Ventura County, Keller Williams. I do a few loans for up in the Central Coast, and we have a couple of loan officers there as well. I didn't realize it was all over Southern California. So keep in mind that the community lending program is for specific areas. It's not low income areas. It's not undesirable areas. It's areas that can just be in various parts of whatever communities homes may be in. So I always recommend to the agents to please just give me a call, send me a text, send me an email, phone call, send me the property address. I will look up the properties for you. We do have a map for one of our investors, but I don't send it out simply because sometimes if it's not done the right way, you'll get misinformation. And because we have a second investor that also does the community lending program, one of them will lend in areas that the other doesn't, and vice versa. So that's why I always just say, send me your property addresses. If you're getting listings or working with buyers and looking at properties, I can always help with looking up those property addresses. Is that home in the community lending area? And can your buyer benefit from significantly lower interest rates for the home that they may be purchasing in that area?
Okay, so you gave your disclaimer of all of this, but give us real numbers. You told us about the good guy interest rate. What about FHA, VA? Those are even better. I'm gonna close this.
Actually, that's true. So government loans, FHA and VA are hovering right now in that mid to upper 6% range. FHA and VA loans are a lot more attractive right now than the regular conventional loans because they don't simply have a lot of the loan add-ons or the pricing adjustments that conforming loans have. So good guy government loans hovering in that mid to upper 6% range, and we're seeing a little bit of bouncing around with interest rates right now. So government loans are great. The regular conventional loans can also be in that upper 6% range, but can go a little bit higher again, depending on credit scores and down payment and where that property may be located.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
So one of the things that we talk about all the time in coaching is you have to find the buyer. Who's selling, who's buying now, who's buying today. So I want to hear from you. Who is that specific client who is buying today? You look through loan packets all day long. So who is it who's buying today? What type of person? Hey guys, we're going to jump into the workshop in just a second, but if you're getting value out of this, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button so you get more videos just like this as soon as they come out. And remember, if you're interested in coaching, reach out to me at the link below. I'd love to talk more about your individual business and how I could help move your business forward. Now let's jump back into the workshop.
Great question. So the type of buyer that's buying today is a serious buyer who has been somewhat educated either by a good loan officer and or a good realtor, because people need to understand there's a lot of people waiting in the wings right now for interest rates to come down. My personal opinion, do not wait for interest rates to come down. Main reason is because there is still such low inventory and there are still a lot of buyers in the market. We're seeing multiple offers on many properties right now and prices are going up a little bit because of that. But when interest rates come down, not if, but when, you're going to see a lot more buyers coming into the market. There's going to be even greater competition, more offers being made on homes, pushing housing prices even higher than they are now. And it's going to create a much more difficult negotiating power for potential buyers when that happens. Because now buyers have to start waiving all of their contingencies, even to just get an offer looked at, let alone accepted. So in my opinion, the serious buyers are out there today because they know I'd rather buy a home today at today's interest rate, knowing that a year or two from now I can refinance and get a lower rate, as opposed to waiting for that lower rate, then paying a higher price for the home and most likely having even a higher mortgage payment than they would have had they bought today and refinanced later on down the line. Plus having the tax advantages and the equity being built up in the home over the next year or two as well. So much greater advantage for buyers looking to purchase today. I'd rather buy a home today at today's interest rate, knowing that a year or two from now I can refinance and get a lower rate, as opposed to waiting for that lower rate, then paying a higher price for the home and most likely having even a higher mortgage payment than they would have had they bought today and refinanced later on down the line. Plus having the tax advantages and the equity being built up in the home over the next year or two as well. So much greater advantage for buyers looking to purchase today.
So this is really important stuff. We have to make sure that you guys hear this and understand it, because this is the kind of conversation you have to have with your buyers right now. You have to be telling them, especially for the ones who are sitting and waiting on the sidelines saying, oh, I'm going to wait for interest rates to drop. When, like you said, when interest rates drop, the buyers are going to flood the market, and it's all about supply and demand. There's still going to be a low inventory. Even if a bunch of people decide to sell, there's still going to be a low inventory. Buyer demand is going to be really high, and it's going to drive those housing prices up, making it so that it's so unaffordable for most people. So we've talked about, you touched on interest rates are going to go down. What is it that we're seeing right now? I know it has to do with a lot of things. Give us the Reader's Digest version of it.
Okay, there are so many things affecting interest rates right now, but the one major factor, as I'm sure you all heard and know, is inflation. So because the Feds are still looking at trying to curb that inflation, and we've seen a little bit of a lowering over time, and the Feds have to see or want to see that the consistency of it is going to be more than just a month or two. They're looking for more long-term of lower inflationary numbers coming out in the consumer price index and all of the different things that come out in terms of economic news. So realistically, the next Fed meeting is going to be in June. After that is July. The next one is going to be in September, then November and December. So personally, at the beginning of the year, I was predicting that the Fed may drop their short-term interest rates probably in May. And then after February, March rolled around, I'm like, you know what, that ain't gonna happen because inflation isn't dropping to the degree that we need it to. So then people were starting to predict maybe June, and I said, I don't see that happening either. Realistically, maybe September, and that's what I'm seeing now as more economics are starting to look at the possibilities of when the Fed may make a move, and that's if inflation starts showing significant signs of it. I'm sorry, not significant, but more consistent history of it coming down. So my personal opinion, I don't see the Feds dropping rates until possibly September. And in the meantime, we're going to see a lot of bouncing around based on what other economic data is coming into the markets that could possibly influence the Feds to make that move.
Yeah. So there's always a lot of speculation. Nobody has a crystal ball. We talk about this all the time. So when you're talking to your clients, you need to have that disclaimer too, right? Nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know when this is going to happen. Oh, okay, good. Come to Martin. He has the crystal ball. So we don't know when this is going to happen. We need to make sure that we are on the forefront of this and really seeing what are the changes, what are the factors, what are people saying, what are But realistically, even the professionals, even the people who are doing this day in and day out, they're getting it wrong. They said we were going to have price dropping last year in May, this time last year. We never saw that. So we're seeing that there are some key factors, and specifically it's like the macroeconomics, talking about inflation and the unemployment and all of that goes into figuring out mortgage rates. And so we have to understand the basics of it. We don't have to have a master's degree in economics, but you have to know where to go. You have to know who your people are to get that information so that you can stay on the forefront of it, and specifically so that you can talk to your clients about what's coming and when and what that will mean for them, because that's what's important. You can know everything in your head and be able to talk about it and figure it out, but if you can't communicate it to your clients, it's not going to help you at all. It's not going to help them.
Can I add to that?
Please.
One of the biggest things that I'm seeing right now with the clients that I'm meeting and that are making offers and getting them accepted, I'm having conversations with buyers that, look, I know interest rates are a little bit high right now, higher than they used to be. Housing prices have been going up for all of the reasons that we just recently spoke of as to why now is a good time to buy. I'm always trying to help educate clients by basically stating, look, if you're looking to purchase a home, getting out of wherever you're at now, bettering and improving your home life situation with your family, and if you can comfortably afford it and qualify for it, now is an incredible time and an incredible opportunity to purchase, because you're going to get so far ahead of the game by doing so at this time that it's going to make much greater financial sense, and just being able to purchase your own home and having that place to live in and being comfortable with your family instead of renting, waiting for things to change, and everybody's rents are going up as well. So I'm just telling everybody, if you can qualify for the loan and if you're comfortable with the affordability of the home you're purchasing, now is a great time to purchase.
I agree. There's been a lot of hate on the internet about the whole date the rate, marry the house, date the rate. And the reality is that the people who are like the naysayers, the haters, they're saying, if you can't afford it, then you shouldn't get the house. And I'm like, of course, who's saying anything other than that? Don't buy a house you can't afford, bottom line. But if you can afford it, it's going to be so much better for you in the long run than renting. It's funny because I just saw, I think it was a Forbes article or something came out maybe in Time mag, I don't know what it was, doesn't matter. It was an article that came out that was talking about, is it better to rent or buy in the long run? And it was like running the numbers, talking about how much your average maintenance is, how much, all this stuff. But what it didn't take into account are like the tax savings. It didn't take into account all the appreciation that you would be getting. It didn't take into account so many different things. And I was like, also, it didn't take into account the fact that as you pay down your mortgage, that money would be going to a landlord. And instead, it's going to pay down your own mortgage. So to me, I've never heard a good argument for it's better to rent in the long run. In the short run, maybe, but that's never a good solution in the long run.
Rent is 100% interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're worried about interest rates, don't rent, because you have absolutely nothing going towards a principal reduction of any type of thing that you own.
Yes. All right. So let's switch gears from interest rates.
Okay.
We'll talk about the big topic of conversation that's been happening, which is buyer commissions. So also a disclaimer, we have to have lots of disclaimers in today's workshop.
Welcome to real estate.
Yes, exactly. Number one, we don't know 100% what's going to be in effect come the summer, July, August. We have in general things that we know and guidelines that could change 200 times until then. What we do pretty much know is that things are changing, and realistically, there's going to be, I would say, more transparency, specifically on the seller side. So the sellers are going to be told, okay, as a listing agent, here's my commission that you're going to be paying me. And then we're going to have an option to pay the buyer. Well, guess what? We always had that option. It was always an option. It was always a negotiation. There's nothing that has changed, except that there's a new conversation that needs to be had specifically with the sellers. Okay. In the event that a seller is not paying commission, in the event that the buyer is going to be negotiating, the buyer's agent is going to be negotiating commission with the seller's agent. The seller agrees to it. You come in on the lending side with, we've always had a limit for closing costs and what that can be.
Right.
Whatever, set to. And now there are some changes. So I want you to speak to that. The changes of like Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I
It's
do.
my coffee. All right, you do it. You're the professional in this. I'll stay in my lane.
There you go. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Thank you.
And that's okay. I love that you do that because when I talk in public, I always do things like that. Also, someone's like, am I the only one that does this? So thank you.
You're welcome. I did it just for you.
So all that being said, that's a great topic to bring up to both buyers and sellers. So with everything that's coming up with the potential changes that we may be seeing, realistically, in my opinion, I still think everything is still status quo from a standpoint of realistically, most sellers, in my opinion, are still going to be able to build in whatever the commissions are to both buying and selling agents into the price of their home. That's been normal, that's been customary, and I still see most of the sellers doing that. For those who do not want to pay the buyer's real estate's commission, realistically, we have to understand that unless they're paying cash or unless they have sufficient funds to still qualify for a loan, make their down payment, cover their closing costs, and cover a 2 or 3% real estate commission, unless that buyer wants to do that or has the ability to do that, if they're obtaining financing from a lending perspective, please keep in mind that we can only give certain credits for certain costs. Unfortunately, the real estate expense is not a cost that lenders will allow for to be credited for by a seller. So what we need to do is if a seller does not want to pay any real estate commission, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer do not have the ability to pay for that commission out of their pocket. They have to build it into the price of the home. So they're going to renegotiate with the seller a higher price to cover that real estate commission. Aside from coming into, are we going to have an appraisal this year or not? But assuming all of that works out, from a lending standpoint, lenders will only allow for credits from a seller to go towards loan closing costs, points, lender fees, title fees, escrow fees, prorated items, impound accounts, things of that nature. The real estate commission being paid is not a loan cost. So therefore, lenders, and this isn't just Motif Mortgage, this is everybody, whether they understand this yet or not, I don't know. But I've done a lot of research into this with a lot of management and underwriting teams as to how all of this works. So from a lending perspective, a seller cannot credit the buyer for a real estate expense. If a buyer is going to increase the price of the home to cover the real estate expense, it has to be an expense to the seller and paid for by the seller. It cannot be an expense to the buyer and then credited from the seller to the buyer. And I hope that makes sense. So on a closing statement, we always typically see the seller's expense showing real estate commissions being paid to 1 or 2 different real estate offices. It never shows up on a buyer's side as an expense. So going forward, even if the seller does not wish to pay for the buyer's real estate commission fees, if we build it into the sales price of the home, it is still going to show as an expense on the seller side being paid for by the seller. It is not going to show or can't show on the buyer side as an expense being credited for from the seller to the buyer, showing a credit of $10 or $15 or $20,000 for real estate expenses on the buyer side of the closing statement. I know this gets confusing. I hope that explains it. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to take those from you. But it has to be a seller expense. And keep in mind too, if you're dealing with veterans, a veteran cannot pay for the real estate expense. So it has to show as an expense on the seller side.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does help because I know that that was, even last week, that was a confusion because Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae
Yes.
had changed guidelines to say that, yes, you can't, or it's separate, but VA hadn't done that yet.
Okay, so interesting that you say that. I saw the same thing. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac came out with basically stating the same thing I just stated, but they put it in different verbiage that made it sound like, yes, you can give a credit for the expense. You're not giving a credit for it. If I remember correctly, and I read this several times, it was okay for the seller to take the expense of it for the benefit of the payment of the buyer's real estate expense. It's how the wording is done in their guidelines. So it is not the seller crediting the buyer, it's the seller taking on the expense on behalf of the buyer. Does that
Okay,
make sense?
yes, and it does make sense, and because of that, that's why the VA it's okay with the VA.
Well, no, it's not okay with VA.
It's still not okay with
No.
VA, even if it's an expense and not a credit.
I'm sorry. If it is a seller expense, VA is okay for that.
Okay, okay.
Because the seller is paying the commission, not the buyer.
But if the buyer is trying to do it and they agree to an increased closing,
Sales price.
purchase price, then it's still not okay in a VA loan.
Okay.
See, there's a lot that needs
There's
to
a
be
lot
ironed
that-
out here.
So, I'm hearing what you're saying. If a buyer, veteran buyer, is increasing the price of the home and it's agreed upon between buyer and seller that here's our purchase price. Seller is paying the real estate expense for both realtors involved in the transaction.
Okay, so
So-
even if the buyer is the one who would be paying for it, the seller's not agreeing to pay for it, the buyer is going to pay for it, but they're saying
The buyer's
to be able to roll it into the
buyer's
loan.
not agreeing to pay for it. They're agreeing to increase the purchase price of the home to cover the expense of it, which is being paid for by the seller.
And essentially, the lender doesn't want to hear any of that.
They will hear what I just stated because they will see it in a contract.
Okay, and that's okay.
That they've renegotiated the purchase price. Seller is covering the expense of the real estate commission, and it will appear as an expense on the seller side of the closing statement.
But in reality, it's rolled into the buyer loan.
It's built into the sales price of the home, which technically is going to be financed by a loan, especially if the veteran is making a zero down payment and financing 100% of the loan.
Okay,
That would be a correct statement.
okay. Interesting. See, there's even some new things that are coming here. So,
It's not what's said, it's how you say it.
yeah, I know. Adina said I'm so confused. There's a lot that is going to be happening and changing, and there's a lot more clarification to come as this really rolls out and comes in, like we're starting to see it more often. So you said, so the bottom line, only the seller will cover these expenses. No, the buyer can pay out of pocket for these expenses. This is when we're talking about increasing the purchase price. That's if the seller is saying, I will not pay for these expenses. But the buyer is saying, okay, well, I want to roll my buyer's agent commission into my loan.
Into
So
the sales price of the home.
right, but for layman's terms, they're rolling it into the loan because they can't pay for it out of pocket.
Be careful how you use the terminology. because
Okay.
Technically, you're not building in a commission into the loan amount. You're building into the price of the home. So now, based on whatever the down payment may be, is it possible the loan amount could be a little bit higher because of a higher sales price? Yes. But from a technical standpoint, we want to be careful of the verbiage that we use.
Okay.
Because we don't want to tell buyers that they can build the real estate commission into their loan. We're not building it into the loan, we're building into the sales price, which could create a slightly higher loan amount.
So then what that tells me, as my wheels are turning and like, how does this play out in the future? What that tells me is that what we could likely see are still even higher prices because the seller is saying, well, we've built this into the price of the purchase, into the purchase price.
Yes,
So the seller is willing to have an expense, not give a credit, right?
correct.
The seller is willing to pay for the buyer side, but we've built that into the price of the property, so now it's a higher price.
Yes.
So there's still some changes to come here, is what I'm hearing. There's still some things that we're trying to flesh out. Okay. I really sparked on something here.
Very
So
much.
say what you're gonna say and I'm gonna read some of these.
Are you guys with us?
Well, that's what I'm reading
I
here.
see some head shaking yes, I see some shaking no. So keep in mind that because this is so new to everybody, and even from a lending perspective, I understand it to the nth degree, but to explain it is very difficult, especially trying to explain it so somebody else can understand it. As you can see, this is a very difficult topic. So as always, if anybody ever has any questions, feel free to give us a call. We'll be more than happy to help you and understand this. And I've already been talking not only to buyers, but some sellers to be able to explain how some of this stuff works in trying to put together a transaction for buyer and seller to negotiate how all of this can play out from both sides. So I'm here to help in any way that I can. So use myself, call me, text me, email me. All my information is up on the screen, and you guys can reach me with any questions you may have in how to handle some of this with your buyers and or your sellers.
And remember that we do this every day. And if we're confused, imagine buyers who do this once every 10 years. They're gonna be like,
Yeah.
what? So we really have to get a good handle on this because we do need to explain it in layman's terms. We need
What's
to
that?
let the general public understand what's happening here. Okay, so I wanna go into, there is a good question which you briefly touched on, but I want you to go into it more. If you're building it into the price of the home, what if the home doesn't appraise for that price? Will it affect the loan?
Yes, it can. So that's a great question as well. So always keep in mind, depending on who you're dealing with, is it buyer or seller or both? So if you're dealing with the sellers, you can always let them know that, look, when they bought their home, did they pay the real estate commission? No, it was built into the price of the home that they just bought. And the seller paid the commission. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, since you bought a home and the people that you bought the home from paid the real estate commissions, why would that be any different to you now that you're selling your home? So that's one way to bring it up to them. But another thing is with regard to what if now we have sellers that are marketing their home at a certain price. Buyers now do not have the monies in their pocket to pay the real estate commissions. Seller does not want to pay those commissions. Buyers now negotiate a higher price for the home. Appraised values. Appraised values are always going to be based on what other homes in the area have sold for. So sometimes appraisers will use sometimes listings in the area to justify or substantiate the value they come up with, but by and large, they're usually using recent sales. Hopefully there are recent sales that they don't have to go too far back to achieve the value of the property. If an appraisal comes in low, now we have an issue, and this is going to be something that you guys will need to contend with both buyers and sellers, because what if we have, I'm just going to throw out numbers, an $800,000 home. Seller does not want to pay real estate commission. Buyers say we want to build that commission into the home. Let's say it's a 3% commission on an $800,000 home. That's $24,000. So now we have to have an $824,000 purchase price. What if all of the homes in the area have sold for $800,000? Can the appraiser bring that $824,000 in? Possibly not. So you as realtors now need to understand on both the buyer and the seller side, if somebody is making an offer at $824,000 in an $800,000 market, if the appraisal does not come in, does the buyer have the ability to make up that difference? They're already getting their real estate commissions covered by the seller. We can't cover anything further from any credits now from the seller, except for maybe some closing costs. So now, does the buyer have an extra 10 or 15 or 20 or $24,000 to make up the difference in the sales price of the home? Or can they go from, say, instead of their 20% down, now they're going to qualify for an 85% LTV loan? So there's a lot of different things that come into play, because now there could be mortgage insurance on the loan. Does the buyer qualify for that mortgage? So we always have to come into understanding that if we're going to make an offer on a home, and if there's a potential for that offer to be higher than what the values may be from an appraisal standpoint, does the buyer have the ability, one, to come up with the cash for the difference, or do they have the ability to take out a slightly higher loan amount at a slightly higher loan to value, and can they still qualify for the loan? If that's the case, then you have an offer to present, because now no matter what situation arises, we can now represent to the sellers that the buyers are going to be qualified buyers, regardless of the situation that comes into play.
So that really is, it's all gonna have to kind of flesh out at the same time.
Yeah.
Because appraisers are looking at closed sales. Those closed sales might not represent the same types of transactions as we're gonna be seeing, because maybe we're gonna see higher purchase prices now and things like that to be able to compensate. So it may take a little bit of time, but the thing is that in the higher, in like a turnkey ready, move-in ready home, you likely already are seeing higher offers. And it was the same thing that happened a couple of years ago when it was like everybody was waiving every contingency. If we get into a market like that again, we're gonna see similar things where people are waiving contingencies left and right. Doesn't matter if it appraises, we're gonna be able to come and cover it and all that kind of stuff. So we're just gonna have to have a different conversation with our buyers. We're gonna have to be able to say this, and sellers. We're gonna be able to have to let them know what's going on, what the potential is, and what opportunity there is for them if they're willing to go higher. Now, where I see, and I've always seen this from the time that all of this litigation was going on, I feel like the biggest victims here are first-time home buyers who don't have a lot of money,
Yes.
because they now won't be able to have that wiggle room. If they are trying to roll it into, not roll it in a loan, I'm gonna have you
Purchase
repeat that.
price of the home.
If they're trying to increase the purchase price of the home, offer something higher, and it doesn't appraise, they don't have any money to come out of pocket to do anything about that. Oftentimes they're doing a 3.5%, 4%, 5% loan. That's all the money they have. So talk to us about maybe some first-time homebuyer problem. Just talk to me, kind of brainstorm with me about that.
I see this a lot, actually. So that's a great topic to bring up. Anytime that I meet with any clients, I go through not only their qualifications, but realistically, what situations could they run into with regard to these types of price increases, or can they come into a situation where if an appraisal doesn't come into play? So waiving contingencies, I'm not a big fan of waiving contingencies, especially the appraisal, and never the loan contingency until we have at least the loan underwritten. But if we're waiving appraisal contingencies, any good real estate agent on the listing side is also going to know, wait, if you're waiving that contingency, that listing agent's going to know realistically, based on the price that that home goes out at, is there a possibility the appraisal may not come in? Good listing agents are going to know that up front, and they're going to say, you know what, if this property doesn't appraise out, does the buyer have the ability to make up the difference somehow, some way on a low appraisal? So anytime that I meet with clients, I'm always looking for, here's the sales price of the home. Realistically, what could it go out for? I will always ask the agents, what realistically do you think the value of this home may be? And is there a possibility that we could have a lower appraisal? And if that's the case, do the buyers have the ability to make up that difference, or can they qualify for a higher loan amount at a higher loan to value with mortgage insurance if necessary, to be able to make all of this work and to be able to waive that contingency? So it all comes down to what the buyer brings to the table. Do they have the ability to make up any difference? And that's where I'll work with them. Do they have family members who can help with a gift if that situation arises? Do they have a retirement account or a 401k plan that they can either take monies out of or can borrow against? Not that they need to or have to, but is it a possibility that they will consider should the appraisal come in low? And for that purpose, keep in mind also, I've been a licensed financial advisor for the last 25 years. So I go through and discuss with clients, here are all the pros and cons of different scenarios that could arise and what your abilities to handle some of these things may be, not just from a qualifying standpoint, but from a financial aspect as well, because I want to make sure that they're comfortable there too.
Okay, so I mean, realistically, it's case by case. So when we talk about a first-time home buyer who barely has any money to bring to the table, it may be that this isn't their time and we need to wait. Maybe it's a family gift or, you know, something like that. Maybe we take a year or two to help them increase, not help them increase their credit score, but talk to them about what they can do to become to be
More
in a better qualified
buyers,
position.
correct. That's a great thing to bring up. And yes, we do have that conversation with the
Mhm.
client. They may not just be quite ready yet because of some of the situations that may present themselves.
Yeah, I anticipate, I shouldn't say this, so don't listen. I anticipate with all of this and all of the fallout of this, there are going to be some times that people come in and there's gonna be more programs available to first-time home buyers, just like there already are. And I think especially in the less affordable areas, they may just incentivize them even
Mhm.
more. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so we do have a question that I wanted to address. Don't you think that listing a home with a slightly higher price than comparable just to cover the buyer commission is lessening your chances of selling it? So this is where it really depends on what the market is, what that super local market is. Because if you're in a market that is selling at consistently 800,000 and you're trying to sell a home that is not comparable to these houses, maybe it needs a lot of work, maybe it has ugly gross carpet, maybe it has a nasty smell, and you're trying to sell it for 824 to cover that buyer's compensation, yeah, that's probably not going to be your best bet. But that's where pricing the property is so key. And also when we talk about, just a caveat, and then we won't speak of this again, but every MLS, every board is going to have their own specific rules to how you can communicate about buyer compensation, or if you can communicate it at all. So my board is talking about how there's going to be a little button that you can press that says, yes, buyer, blah, blah, blah. To me, I feel like, isn't that going totally against what they're saying? So I don't know if this is going to come out. I don't know if in 2 months this is still going to be the thing. Keep close attention to your board, your local board, see what they're saying, because that's going to be a big key. But when we're talking about communicating via MLS and having that verbiage or not, you're going to have to be able to kind of talk individually with the agents, because you can talk to agents and let them know the sellers are willing to put this in, and you just can't have it on the MLS. So if you are listing at a higher price to deal with that, this is where we're going to have to see basically in your local market, in that local neighborhood market, what is it that this house would sell for? And then can you justify putting it in a higher price? But typically I would say yes. If you're trying to sell it fast, if you're trying to sell it for a higher price, you start it lower because you want to get that bidding war going. But part of that bidding war is going to be, oh, they're offering to compensate buyer commissions. So we're going to have to wait to see how this all shakes out. What did you have to add?
Conversation I had with a recent seller. They were looking at about an $800,000 home, and they were debating whether they wanted to cover the buyer's real estate commissions. So the conversation you need to have with that type of a seller is very simply, if you want to have an $800,000 purchase price of a home with a normal 6% commission, well, if you don't want to cover the buyer's.
Wait, we don't say normal 6% commission.
I caught myself.
With an X% commission, whatever you want to say.
I heard myself say it, and I wanted to just keep going, hoping that nobody heard it.
I know,
So
sorry,
thank
I
you.
heard it.
Because I heard it also, and I'm like, oops.
I know,
I'm trying to
I
just
do
keep
that
rolling
too.
with it. So if you have an $800,000 home with a 6% commission, and Mr. Seller doesn't want to pay a 3% buyer's commission, not a problem, Mr. Seller, let's just go back and say, instead of 8 and 6, let's go at 775 and 3. The net effect to the seller is still the same amount, but now we're reducing the price to not cover the extra 3% or possibly for the buyer's side of the commission. And now going in at a more appropriate price that could slightly be under the market at that time because other homes have sold where they paid the real estate commissions, but now you're creating that bidding war like Brittany had brought up. So you can always have that conversation with the sellers that you want to start high with a 6% commission, or if you don't want to pay the buyer's real estate commissions, then let's go in at that 775 mark at 3% and we'll call it a day.
And these numbers are all totally
Hypothetical.
Yes, they're all
Yeah.
hypothetical. You can do whatever you want. You can charge 85% commission if you want. I don't, but maybe I should. Okay, so I want to switch gears a tiny bit to what you just were talking about well, I don't know if you were just talking about this, but let's just switch gears altogether. When we talk about negotiation, let's go back to negotiations. And when we're negotiating with a listing agent and we need to negotiate potentially more than, these are two different questions that I wrote down. So anyway, let's start with one. We need to negotiate more than the closing costs. What are some options that we have there? This is a totally separate conversation, by the way, from the buyer's compensation.
Okay, so when you're doing just closing costs, any negotiation for closing costs, the seller credit cannot be anything in excess of the actual closing cost of the loan. So if the buyer's closing cost, just round numbers, are $10,000, seller's credit cannot exceed that amount. If the buyer's closing costs do not come to $10,000, buyers could be leaving a little bit on the table. I try to watch for that as well. So once we know what the actual cost may be, if it doesn't come up to the actual credit that there is, we might be able to look at maybe a slight rate buy down or paying a quarter or a half a point to maybe get an extra 8 lower in the interest rate. So that being said, if we're now negotiating any types of rate buy downs, or a buyer is paying a point or a point and a half or even 2 points on a loan to buy the interest rate down, those are parts of the closing cost of the loan. So in a regular, I almost said normal again, in a regular type of a loan where the closing cost may be $10,000, but the buyer is paying a point for closing costs, and say their loan amount is $500,000, now we have an additional $5,000 being added to those costs. Now the seller credit, instead of 10, could be $15,000. So how we're negotiating these credits from a seller is going to be dependent on what the actual closing costs may be and what the cost of that rate buy down, if any, may be as well.
So there are other ways around this. If it's like, oh, we need to negotiate $100,000 off, and there's no way that, you know, the closing costs are never going to get that high.
Correct.
Now we talk about a price reduction.
Yes.
So, okay, that's a bad example, because talk about if the price reduction and the closing costs were about the same, which is better to do and why in the long run?
Great question. So there's always the term rate reduction and price reduction. So keep in mind that anytime you do a price reduction, is the buyer paying less for the home? Yes. Based on their down payment, they'll have a slightly lower loan amount as well. That will also reduce their mortgage payments. But if you do a rate reduction, even at the slightly higher price, and even though the buyer is now paying a little bit higher loan amount because of that higher price, a rate reduction will save somebody more in their monthly payments than a price reduction will. Typically, you can have, and I tell this to listing agents all the time, because sometimes you see them offering a home that's been on the market for a little while, and they do a price reduction of $25,000. And I will call them and say, you shouldn't have done that, simply because if you offer a rate reduction and offer that same $25,000 or even less as a interest rate reduction credit to a potential buyer, that interest rate credit will give them a lower interest rate, which will further reduce their payments than the price reduction would have had. And sometimes it can be $100 to $200 a month better in payment to the buyer by having an interest rate buy down instead of a price reduction. That's huge.
Yeah, that's good. All right, I want to wrap this up and I want to leave some time for questions too. We're at almost 12:20. So my last question,
Okay.
maybe, we'll see. Is today still a good time to buy?
Yes, definitely. Even with interest rates where they're at, I try to tell all of my clients that if you are able to qualify for the loan, and if the payments are affordable and comfortable to you, now is an excellent time to buy, simply because inventory is still low, but some buyers have gone by the wayside because they're waiting for interest rates to drop. The second those rates do drop, buyers are going to come out in droves, and trying to make offers on homes are going to become extremely more difficult. You're going to have less negotiating power as a buyer to go into these transactions. And instead of seeing 2 or 3 or 4 offers on a property, we're going to get back to 10, 12, 15 offers on a property. And it's going to make it even more difficult for buyers' offers to get accepted. So I'm telling buyers now that even though interest rates are still a little bit on the higher side, now is still an excellent opportunity and time to purchase that home, simply because I'd rather see you get in the house now be able to have some negotiating power with a potential seller to be able to get your offer accepted, get into the home, refinance it in a year or two, and build up that equity and get those tax advantages of owning the home. Get into the home today, because the longer you wait, the more challenging it's going to become, and the more difficult it may be to find an affordable house, because housing prices will go up the second rates drop.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I even now am seeing, there was a house that what I personally was gonna put an offer on, and it had like, I don't know, 6 offers the second day on the market. I like fixers and ugly houses, so that's why probably, but still, we're already seeing this. We're still seeing this, I should say. There really has not been a time in the recent few years that we haven't seen multiple offers. Some properties don't have multiple offers, but lots of properties do have multiple offers. And when we are talking about interest rates going down, that triggers the buyers to say, oh, now's my time, and they're gonna flood the market. So, isn't any time a good time to buy? I like that question.
What is the question?
Isn't any time a good time to buy?
Now is always the best time. So the reason for that is because, again, if it's comfortable for you, if it's affordable for you, you can qualify for the loan, get into the home. My personal opinion, now is always the best time. Today is going to be better than tomorrow, which is going to be better than next month or next year, simply because we're going to see a lot of volatility, in my opinion, with interest rates. Get your rate fixed today, get your payments fixed today, get your tax advantages, and start building the equity in your home and making that home yours for you and your family. And to be able to start taking advantage of all of that, again, like we talked about, the second rates go down, more people are going to flood the markets, housing prices are going to go up. Guess what? If you owned a home a year or two from now, and those housing prices go up, that's equity you've now just built into your home. Or you can even now maybe borrow against it, go purchase another property when interest rates drop. So there's lots of advantages you have financially as well by purchasing that home today and holding on to it for a little bit of time, waiting for all of those changes to take place.
Yeah. So the answer is, for some people, yes, anytime is a good time to buy. And for some people, waiting 6 months for interest rates to drop is going to be really bad for them. That's not going to be the best time for them to buy. But I agree. The best time to buy is
Now,
3 years ago. The second best time to buy is today. If we didn't get in when it was 2% interest rates, today is the best time, because we need to get in and start building that equity. All right, I'm gonna let you guys take it over, so you can unmute, you can put things in the chat. We have a few more minutes that I want to make sure your questions get answered.
I got another follow-up question.
All right, let's hear it.
Somebody told me that if you were getting people trying to put you off because they think that the housing market will be better in the next year or whatever, just tell them that the housing prices always appreciate faster, statistically speaking, than the buyers saving up for a down payment, or it's always going to be appreciating more, and that's going to turn them around. That mental negativity that everybody else, the armchair people that think they know more than anybody else, say that, oh, it's going to be a better time to buy, say before the election, but that really makes sense to me. And it's
here's a great thing you can bring up to buyers like that, or even sellers. So understand that when I meet with clients, some of them are saying, well, maybe we should wait. We're going to save more money for a down payment. I said, okay, how much money are you saving every month now? And they throw out a number. But realistically, keep in mind that housing is still appreciating, even at a 2 to 5% clip right now. So even at, I'm going to split the difference and go 3%. On an $800,000 home, that's $24,000. So Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, if you're going to try to save money for a down payment, how much do you think you can save this year? Well, we can save another $1,000 a month. Okay, great. There's $12,000 that you might save throughout the next year. But the home you're going to buy a year from now is going to go up $24,000. Have you saved anything in the purchase price of that home? You're actually losing ground trying to save money, keeping up with the appreciation of property values. So always let your clients know that if you're trying to save money to buy the home, if you have sufficient funds today to make a down payment to qualify for a loan, get into the home now. Just because you save another $10,000 or $12,000 isn't going to change anything realistically from a payment standpoint. And by saving 10 or 12,000 bucks over the next year, you're going to be losing ground in what the cost of the home is going to be.
I do have one thing to add, Dennis. You mentioned, I like what you talked about. Hey, it's, you know, your appreciation is going to be higher than your savings rate. What I would add to that, just for a liability purpose, I would add to that historically. It always has been. Instead of saying it's always going to, you want to say it always has. So you can point to saying, yes, it always has, because we don't know what's coming in the future. And we're in California. It's highly litigious. People want to sue you for any reason. Don't give them any reason to sue you. So that's the only thing I would add to that, is just add that little word historically. This is what's happening.
I agree. Thank you for that. That's a good suggestion.
All right. And then Adina says she's definitely going to be calling you.
I'll look forward to it.
All right. Anything else? All right. Well, stay tuned. Remember, there's no workshop next week because of Memorial Day. The week after that, we're going to be doing contracts with Lori. So I won't be here with you next week, or for 2 weeks. I will see you in 3 weeks. But if you have any questions, you have my number, you have my email address. And if you're not in coaching and want to move your business forward, you want to get unstuck, definitely reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. We've been adding a lot of people who are not just brand new agents. They're agents who have been in their business and just need a little extra push to get them to focus and move forward. So thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next week. Not next week. We will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you, Martin. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
guys.
Brittany.
Well, I hope that helped. And remember, I'm here every Monday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to help you move your business forward. Join me in the weekly workshops where you can come live and get your questions answered in real time. I would love to see you there. Register at the link below. And remember, if you have questions about coaching or want to dive in, or even just want to have a call to me to see how you can grow your business, schedule a call with me in the link below. I'd love to help. In the meantime, if you're getting value out of this, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for staying for the whole thing. Check out the other videos that we have that are sure to move your business forward. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.